The last battleship duel in history ended with Japan's fleet burning. I should know. I watched it unfold through the rangefinder optics of USS West Virginia's main battery director, my hand steady on the firing solutions that would send 16-inch shells screaming across the dark waters of Surigao Strait. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, that was me, and for 27 months I'd been dreaming of this moment, ever since those bastards caught us sleeping at Pearl Harbor and put 2 torpedoes into West Virginia's port side. Now, in the pre-dawn darkness of October 25, 1944, we sat like a steel wall across the northern mouth of Surigao Strait, part of Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's battle line, 6 battleships strong, 5 of them Pearl Harbor veterans with scores to settle. The irony was delicious and deliberate. West Virginia, Tennessee, California, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Mississippi formed an iron gauntlet that would exact vengeance in the most traditional way possible. Battleship against battleship, main gun against main gun, in a line of battle that Lord Nelson himself would have recognized. Admiral Oldendorf had positioned us with surgical precision across the strait's 10-mile-wide mouth, our battle line oriented east-west to maximize our broadside firepower. We were the cork in the bottle, and Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's southern force was about to sail straight into our trap. Intelligence had given us the gift of forewarning. Japanese battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, heavy cruiser Mogami, and 4 destroyers were steaming north through the strait, hoping to break into Lake Gulf and savage MacArthur's invasion fleet. They had no idea what waited for them in the darkness ahead. We had every advantage: superior numbers, radar fire control, and most importantly, we held the tactical position that every naval officer since the age of sail had dreamed of, crossing the enemy's teeth. The Japanese would have to approach us in column, their forward ships masking the fire of those behind, while we could bring every gun in our battle line to bear on their lead vessels. From my position in the main battery plotting room, I could feel West Virginia's massive bulk settling deeper into the water as we came to battle stations. Around me, my gun crews moved with practiced efficiency, their faces illuminated by the red glow of instrument lights. Fire Controlman First Class Rodriguez scaled out ranges and bearings in a steady stream, while gunners Mate Chief Kowalski supervised the loading of armor-piercing shells into the magazine hoists. These men had trained for this moment through countless gunnery drills in the Pacific, and now their Pearl Harbor ghosts would finally find rest. The beauty of Oldendorf's plan lay in its elegant simplicity. He had deployed his destroyers and PT boats in the narrow southern approaches to Surigao Strait, where they would harass and hopefully damage the Japanese column as it approached. His cruisers formed a secondary line south of the battleships, ready to add their 8-inch and 6-inch guns to the bombardment. But we battleships were the hammer, the killing blow that would smash whatever remained of Nishimura's force. As I checked my fire control solutions one final time, I thought about the mathematics of naval warfare. Each of our 16-inch guns could hurl a 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell over 20 miles with devastating accuracy, thanks to our Mark 8 fire control radar. We had 48 heavy guns in our battle line, capable of throwing nearly 65 tons of steel and explosive in a single broadside. The Japanese had 18 heavy guns between their 2 battleships. Good odds for us, even if Yamashiro and Fuso were formidable opponents. The radio crackled with reports from our scouts. Hostile column bearing 180 degrees, range 35,000 yards, speed 20 knots. Nishimura was coming straight up the middle of the strait, exactly as Oldendorf had predicted. In my headset, I heard Captain Benyon's calm voice ordering the ship to general quarters, though we'd been at battle stations for hours. The hunt was about to begin. The first blood belonged to our Tinkin sailors, those magnificent bastards who took their fragile destroyers into harm's way while we battleships waited in the darkness like patient hunters. From 25 miles away, I listened to the radio chatter as Captain Jesse Coward's destroyer Squadron 54 made their torpedorans against the approaching Japanese column. The night erupted with gunfire and explosions as destroyers McDermott, Monson, and Melvin launched their fish and raced away through the smoke and flame. Torpedoes running hot, straight, and normal, came the report from McDermott. 30 seconds later, multiple hits on lead battleship. She's slowing and falling out of formation. That would be Fuso, and she was about to have a very bad night. Our destroyers had managed something that seemed impossible. They'd drawn first blood against Japanese battleships with nothing but speed and audacity, and Mark 15 torpedoes. But the Japanese weren't finished. As Destroyer Squadron 56 under Captain Roland Smoot made their own attack runs, the enemy column began to disintegrate under the hammer blows of torpedo hits and the chaos of night combat. Fuso, badly damaged and listing, fell behind her consorts and began to burn like a torch in the darkness. Two of the Japanese destroyers simply vanished from radar contact, blown apart or sent to the bottom by our torpedo attacks. From my position in West Virginia's Fire Control Center, I could see the brilliant flashes of gunfire and explosions far to the south, like heat lightning on a summer night. Each flash meant death and destruction for Japanese sailors, and I felt the cold satisfaction of a professional warrior watching his enemy being systematically destroyed. This wasn't personal. It was just good naval warfare. The radio reports painted a picture of beautiful chaos as our destroyers completed their attacks and withdrew northward, their mission accomplished. They had bloodied Nishimura's nose and disrupted his formation, but more importantly, they had slowed the Japanese advance and given us precious time to refine our firing solutions. Yamashiro was now leading what remained of the southern force herself, the crippled Fuso somewhere behind in the darkness, heavy cruiser Mogami, and destroyer Shigeru. Admiral Oldendorf's plan was working to perfection. The Japanese had run a gauntlet of torpedo attacks and emerged battered and reduced in strength, exactly as intended. Now they were steaming directly toward our battle line with their fighting power diminished and their formation in disarray. It was like watching a wounded animal stumble into a carefully prepared trap. My plotting team updated our fire control solutions based on the latest radar contacts. Range, 18,000 yards in closing. Bearing, 185 degrees relative. Speed, 15 knots. Yamashiro was still coming north, either ignorant of what awaited her or determined to die fighting. Given what I knew of Japanese naval tradition, I suspected the latter. All ships, this is CTF 77.2, Admiral Oldendorf's voice crackled over the radio. Stand by to commence firing. We will open fire at 15,000 yards. Around me, I could hear the mechanical whine of turret machinery as our three massive 16-inch gun turrets trained out to port, their 65-foot barrels reaching across the dark water like the fingers of death itself. In a few minutes, we would add our voice to the thunder of battle. The waiting was almost over. Pearl Harbor was about to be avenged. At 0351 hours, with the range closing to 15,600 yards, Admiral Oldendorf gave the order that I'd been waiting 3 years to hear: commence firing. The night exploded into artificial daylight as our entire battle line opened fire simultaneously, 48 heavy guns hurling death across the dark waters of Surigao Strait. From my position in the main battery director, I watched our first salvo reach out like the fist of an angry god. West Virginia's triple 16-inch turrets fired in sequence, Turret 1, Turret 2, Turret 3, each salvo creating a pressure wave that rattled every piece of equipment in the ship and left my ears ringing despite the sound-dampening gear. The muzzle flashes turned night into day for a split second, illuminating the entire battle line in stark relief before plunging us back into darkness. Through my rangefinder optics, I tracked our shells as they arced across the strait in perfect ballistic curves, their tracers drawing orange lines against the black sky. Our first salvo was a thing of beauty. 6 16-inch shells, each weighing as much as a small automobile, struck Yamashiro in a pattern that covered her from bow to stern. The Japanese battleship disappeared behind a wall of fire and smoke as our armor-piercing rounds punched through her deck armor and exploded deep within her hull. When the smoke cleared, she was burning in at least 3 places and listing to port, but still coming on. Target bearing 182 degrees. Range 14,800 yards. Fire Controlman Rodriguez called out the data in a steady stream while I adjusted our firing solution. She's turning to starboard. Looks like she's trying to unmask her after turrets. That was fine with me. A turning target was easier to hit, and Yamashiro's maneuver would only delay her destruction by a few minutes. Down the line, our sister ships were adding their voices to the thunder. Tennessee's 14-inch guns spoke with authority, sending salvo after salvo into the Japanese column. California and Maryland joined the chorus, their heavy shells raising massive waterspouts around the enemy ships. Pennsylvania and Mississippi brought up the rear of our battle line, their guns training around to engage whatever targets presented themselves. The Japanese were fighting back with desperate courage, but they were hopelessly outgunned. Yamashiro's 14-inch guns flashed in the darkness as she returned our fire, her shells screaming overhead to splash harmlessly in the water behind our battle line. A few of her rounds came uncomfortably close. I saw one shell splash just 50 yards off our starboard beam, close enough to soak our weather decks with spray. But her gunnery was wild and inaccurate, disrupted by our hits and the chaos of night combat. Multiple hits on target. Chief Kowalski's voice carried a note of savage satisfaction as our third salvo found its mark. Through my optics, I watched Yamashiro stagger under the impact of our shells. A massive explosion erupted amidships, probably a magazine hit, and the Japanese battleship began to settle by the bow. She was dying, but she wasn't finished yet. The tactical situation was developing exactly as Admiral Oldendorf had planned. We held the classic advantage of crossing the enemy's T, with our entire battle line able to concentrate fire on the lead Japanese ships, while their rear vessels were masked by their own consorts. Yamashiro was taking the full weight of our bombardment, absorbing punishment that would have sunk a lesser ship in minutes. But battleships die hard, and Yamashiro was a tough old girl. Built in 1915 and modernized between the wars, she displaced 34,700 tons and carried 12 14-inch guns in 6 twin turrets. Under other circumstances, she might have been a worthy opponent for any ship in our battle line. Tonight, facing 6 battleships simultaneously, she was simply target practice. Our fourth salvo achieved what naval gunners call a perfect straddle, 3 shells over, 3 shells under, with at least 2 direct hits. The explosions lit up Yamashiro like a Christmas tree, and I could see secondary fires breaking out along her superstructure. Her forward turret was silent now, probably knocked out by one of our earlier salvos. She was slowing perceptibly, her speed dropping from 15 knots to barely 10. Shift target to heavy cruiser. The order came down from the bridge as Yamashiro began to fall behind, too badly damaged to remain a primary threat. Mogami was next in line, and she was about to receive the full attention of the U.S. Navy's battle line. This was naval warfare at its most fundamental, the systematic destruction of enemy combat power through superior firepower and position. The night was young, and we had plenty of ammunition. Mogami tried to run. The heavy cruiser, realizing that discretion was the better part of valor, attempted to reverse course and flee south toward the safety of the Mindanao Ocean. It was a sensible decision, too late to save her, but sensible nonetheless. Admiral Oldendorf had anticipated this move and positioned his cruisers to block any attempted escape. The Japanese were trapped in a killing ground of our own making. Our battle line shifted fire to the fleeing cruiser with mechanical precision. Mogami was fast, capable of 35 knots under ideal conditions, but she was badly damaged from the earlier destroyer attacks and could manage only 20 knots. More importantly, she was silhouetted against the fire's overburning consorts, making her an easy target for our radar-directed fire control systems. Range 2 heavy cruiser, 12,400 yards in opening, Rodriguez called out. She's zigzagging and laying smoke. Standard evasive tactics, but useless against radar fire control. Our Mark 8 system could track targets through smoke, rain, and darkness with deadly accuracy. Mogami could run, but she couldn't hide. I adjusted our firing solution to account for the cruiser's evasive maneuvers and ordered our turrets to shift targets. The mathematical beauty of naval gunnery never failed to impress me, calculating the intersection of 2 moving objects across miles of ocean, accounting for wind, temperature, and the Earth's rotation. It was applied physics at its deadliest, and we were very good at it. Our first salvo at Mogami was slightly over, raising enormous waterspouts just beyond her stern. The Japanese cruiser was throwing everything she had at us, her 8-inch main battery, her 5-inch secondary guns, even her anti-aircraft weapons, but at 12,000 yards, her shells were falling well short of our battle line. We had the range advantage and the firepower advantage. She was doomed. Our second salvo found her. 3 16-inch shells struck Mogami in rapid succession, one forward, one amidships, one aft. The explosions were spectacular, great gouts of flame and smoke that climbed hundreds of feet into the night sky. When the smoke cleared, the Japanese cruiser was listing heavily to starboard and down by the bow. She was finished as a fighting unit, but we kept shooting anyway. No sense in leaving wounded enemies behind to cause trouble later. Behind Mogami, Yamashiro was in her death throes. The old battleship had taken more punishment than any warship should be able to survive, but she was still afloat and still fighting with her remaining guns. Her casualties must have been horrific. Every hit by our 16-inch shells would have killed dozens of men and destroyed entire compartments. Yet somehow her damage control parties were keeping her alive, even as she burned from stern to stern. The destroyer Shigeru, smallest and most agile of the remaining Japanese ships, was making her own desperate run for safety. She had managed to avoid the worst of our fire by staying close to the burning Yamashiro, using the battleship as a shield while she attempted to escape south. It was good seamanship under impossible circumstances, and I had to admire the skill of her captain. Our cruisers, led by Rear Admiral Russell Berkey, were having their own turkey shoot with the fleeing Japanese ships. Heavy cruisers Louisville, Portland, and Minneapolis added their 8-inch guns to the bombardment, while light cruisers Denver, Columbia, and Phoenix peppered the enemy with 6-inch shells. The combined firepower of our entire task force was focused on the remnants of Nishimura's southern force like a magnifying glass focusing sunlight. "Mogami's dead in the water," came the report from our spotting aircraft. The Japanese cruiser had finally succumbed to a bombardment, her engines silenced and her fires spreading out of control. She was listing so heavily now that her port rail was almost awash. In a few minutes, she would roll over and join her ancestors on the bottom of Surigao Strait. But the real prize was still Yamashiro. The old battleship represented the heart of Japanese naval power in these waters, and her destruction would send a message that would reverberate all the way back to Tokyo. She was dying by degrees, settling deeper into the water with each of our salvos, but she was still fighting. I had to respect her crew's courage, even as I worked to kill them all. "Shift fire back to the battleship," came the order from the bridge. "Yamashiro is still dangerous." Indeed she was. As long as she could float and fight, she remained a threat to our amphibious forces in Lake Gulf. We would pound her until she either surrendered or sank. Given what I knew of Japanese naval tradition, surrender wasn't likely. Yamashiro died hard, as battleships should. For 37 minutes, she absorbed the concentrated fire of our entire battle line, taking hit after hit from 16-inch, 14-inch, 8-inch, and 6-inch guns until her superstructure was a twisted mass of flaming wreckage, and her hull was punctured by dozens of shell holes. Yet still she fought on, her remaining turrets firing defiantly into the night even as her ship settled deeper into the dark waters of Surigao Strait. From a position in the fire control director, I watched her final moments with the detached fascination of a professional warrior witnessing something both terrible and magnificent. This was how the old battleship navy died, not with a whimper, but with the thunder of heavy guns and the roar of exploding magazines. Yamashiro was a relic of an earlier age of naval warfare, but she was going down fighting like the warrior she was. "She's capsizing," Fire Controlman Rodriguez's voice carried a note of awe as we watched the Japanese battleship begin her final roll to port. 30,000 tons of steel and machinery, representing the pinnacle of naval architecture and the graves of over 1,000 Japanese sailors, slowly turned turtle in the phosphorescent wake of her own destruction. Her remaining turrets fired one last defiant salvo as she rolled, their muzzle flashes illuminating the water around her sinking hull. The mathematics of naval warfare are inexorable. Yamashiro had absorbed more than 40 direct hits from heavy-caliber shells, each one punching through her armor and exploding deep within her vitals. Her magazines were flooded, her engine rooms were wrecked, her steering was gone, and her watertight integrity had been shattered by our systematic bombardment. Physics and seamanship could only do so much. Eventually, even the toughest battleship would succumb to that kind of punishment. At 0419 hours, Yamashiro rolled completely over and disappeared beneath the waves, taking Admiral Nishimura and most of her crew with her. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the gunfire had been for the past half hour. The night had been filled with the continuous thunder of heavy guns, and now there was only the distant crackling of fires and the hiss of steam as hot metal met cold seawater. "Cease firing! Cease firing!" The order came down from Admiral Oldendorf as our spotters confirmed the battleship's destruction. Along our battle line, the great guns fell silent for the first time in 37 minutes. The sudden quiet was eerie after the continuous bombardment, broken only by the sound of our own machinery and the distant explosions of secondary fires on the surviving Japanese ships. Mogami was still afloat, but clearly doomed, listing so heavily that her port deck edge was underwater. Fires raged throughout her superstructure, and she was making no attempt to maneuver or return fire. The heavy cruiser was a total loss, kept afloat only by her compartmentalization and skill of her damage control parties. She would sink within the hour, another victim of American naval superiority. The destroyer Shiger, most fortunate of the Japanese ships, had somehow managed to slip away in the confusion and darkness. Her captain had shown remarkable skill and courage, threading his way through our battle line and escaping south toward Mindanao. She would live to fight another day, the sole survivor of Admiral Nishimura's southern force. But what about Fuso? The second Japanese battleship had been badly damaged in the initial destroyer attacks and had fallen far behind her consorts. Our radar showed a large contact to the south, burning fiercely and apparently dead in the water. Fuso was dying slowly, her magazines cooking off in spectacular explosions that lit up the southern horizon like distant lightning. "All stations, this is Admiral Oldendorf," came the voice over the radio. "Well done, gentlemen. We have achieved a decisive victory." Indeed we had. In less than an hour of combat, we had destroyed the entire Japanese southern force save one destroyer. 2 battleships and a heavy cruiser had been sent to the bottom, along with most of their crews. It was a victory that would have made John Paul Jones proud. The tactical situation was now completely in our favor. The northern entrance to Surigao Strait was clear of enemy forces, and MacArthur's invasion fleet in Lake Gulf was safe from this particular threat. Admiral Carrada's more powerful central force was still approaching from the north, but that was a problem for Admiral Halsey and Task Force 34. Our job here was finished. As the adrenaline of combat began to wear off, I felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion that follows intense action. We had done our duty with professional skill and devastating effectiveness. The ghosts of Pearl Harbor could rest easier tonight. 20 miles to the south, Fuso was writing her own epitaph in fire and steel. The second Japanese battleship, sister ship to the sunken Yamashiro, had been mortally wounded in the opening phases of the battle when our destroyers put at least 3 torpedoes into her hull. Now she drifted helplessly in the current, her back broken and her crew fighting desperately to keep her afloat just a few hours longer. Through our spotting aircraft, I could see the magnificent tragedy of her final moments. Fuso had been built in 1914, one of the oldest battleships in the Japanese Navy, and she carried the scars and honors of 30 years of service. Her distinctive pagoda mast, a signature of Japanese battleship architecture, was wreathed in smoke and flame as internal fires spread through her superstructure. She was a beautiful ship dying an ugly death. Fuso's magazines just went up, came the report from our aerial observer. The explosion was visible from 20 miles away, a brilliant flash that turned the southern horizon white for several seconds, followed by a mushroom cloud of smoke and debris that climbed thousands of feet into the pre-dawn sky. When the flash faded, Fuso was gone, vaporized by the detonation of her own ammunition. Over 1,200 Japanese sailors died in that single cataclysmic moment. The destruction of Fuso marked the effective end of organized Japanese resistance in Surigao Strait. Admiral Nishimura's southern force had been completely annihilated in less than 2 hours of combat, victims of superior American tactics, firepower, and technology. Not since the Spanish Armada had a naval force suffered such complete and decisive defeat. Our battle line began to secure from general quarters, but we maintained a high state of readiness in case additional Japanese forces attempted to enter the strait. Intelligence had warned us of a possible second attack by Admiral Shima's second diversion attack force, though that seemed unlikely now that our presence had been revealed. An irrational commander would call off his attack after witnessing the destruction of Nishimura's ships. The tactical lessons of this engagement would be studied in naval academies for generations to come. Admiral Oldendorf had achieved the perfect execution of classical battle line tactics, using radar fire control and superior positioning to destroy a numerically inferior enemy force with minimal losses to his own ships. We had proved that the battleship, properly employed and supported, remained the ultimate arbiter of naval combat. But this victory belonged to more than just our battleships. Our destroyers had drawn first blood with their torpedo attacks, disrupting the enemy formation and damaging the Japanese battleships before they could close to effective gun range. Our cruisers had provided devastating supporting fire and blocked enemy escape routes. Our aircraft had provided spotting and reconnaissance that allowed us to track and engage enemy forces with unprecedented accuracy. Most importantly, this had been a victory of American industrial might and technological superiority. Our radar fire control systems had allowed us to engage enemy ships at ranges and in conditions that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. Our shells were more powerful and accurate than their Japanese counterparts. Our damage control procedures were superior, our gunnery training more thorough, our tactical doctrine more flexible. All stations, this is CTF 77.2. Admiral Oldendorf's voice crackled over the radio again. Reform battle line and prepare to repel additional enemy forces. This may not be over yet. He was right to be cautious. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized night attacks and multiple converging forces. Nishimura's southern force might have been just the opening act. As we maneuvered back into our blocking position across the mouth of Surigao Strait, I reflected on what we had accomplished. In the space of 2 hours, we had avenged Pearl Harbor in the most direct and decisive way possible, by meeting the Japanese Navy in open battle and destroying it completely. The battleship duel, that most traditional form of naval combat, had been fought for what would probably be the last time in history. And we had won. As dawn approached over Surigao Strait, painting the smoke-stained sky in shades of orange and red, a second Japanese force appeared on our radar screens. Admiral Shima's second diversion attack force, heavy cruisers Nachi and Ashigara, light cruiser Abukuma, and 4 destroyers, was approaching from the south, apparently unaware that Nishimura's entire force had been wiped out just hours earlier. From my position in West Virginia's Fire Control Center, I watched the tactical plot with professional interest. Shima's force was smaller than Nishimura's but still formidable, built around 2 heavy cruisers that could deliver devastating 8-inch gunfire if they managed to close the range. However, they were about to encounter the same trap that had destroyed their predecessors. Our battle line was still intact and ready for action. Our ammunition magazines still full. New contacts bearing 185 degrees, range 25,000 yards, Fire Controlman Rodriguez reported. Looks like 2 heavy cruisers and escorts. Admiral Oldendorf's response was immediate and predictable. Prepare to engage. We had established complete tactical dominance over Surigao Strait, and we weren't about to let a second Japanese force slip through our net. But Shima was a more cautious commander than Nishimura. As his force rounded the bend in the strait and encountered the burning wrecks of Fuso, Yamashiro, and Mogami, he quickly realized that he was sailing into a death trap. The destruction was so complete, and the fires so extensive that the southern part of the strait looked like a vision of hell. Twisted metal, burning oil, and the scattered debris of what had once been a powerful naval force. Enemy forces turning away, came the report from our scouts. Shima had seen enough. Rather than continue north into the teeth of our battle line, he ordered his ships to reverse course and retreat south toward the safety of the open ocean. It was the smart tactical decision, but it came too late to save all of his ships from the consequences of Japanese strategic planning. Our cruisers, positioned south of the battle line specifically to intercept retreating enemy forces, were perfectly placed to engage Shima's fleeing ships. Heavy cruisers Louisville and Portland opened fire with their 8-inch guns, while light cruiser Denver added her 6-inch battery to the bombardment. The range was long, over 18,000 yards, but our radar fire control made even extreme-range gunnery feasible. Abukuma, Shima's light cruiser, took several hits and began to lag behind her consorts. The Japanese ship was tough, built to the same high standards as all Imperial Navy vessels, but she couldn't withstand the concentrated fire of 3 American cruisers. Flames erupted from her superstructure, and she began to list to starboard as flooding spread through her hull compartments. The engagement was brief but decisive. Within 20 minutes, Abukuma was dead in the water and burning fiercely, while Shima's heavy cruisers escaped south under cover of smoke and darkness. One of the Japanese destroyers, Asaguma, was also heavily damaged and fell behind, becoming another target for our relentless gunfire. As the sun rose over Surigao Strait, the full extent of our victory became clear. The waters were littered with the debris of Japanese naval power, floating wreckage, oil slicks, and the occasional survivor clinging to life preservers or pieces of decking. 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, 1 light cruiser, and 3 destroyers had been sunk or damaged beyond repair. Over 4,000 Japanese sailors had died in the dark waters of the strait. Our own losses were almost negligible, a few men wounded by shell splinters, some minor damage to destroyer Grant from a near miss, and the expenditure of several hundred rounds of heavy ammunition. It was the most one-sided naval victory in the Pacific War, a triumph of superior tactics, technology, and seamanship. Admiral Oldendorf ordered our destroyers to begin rescue operations for Japanese survivors, following the ancient tradition of the sea that demands aid be given to sailors in distress regardless of nationality. It was a gesture of humanity in the midst of mechanized slaughter, and it spoke well of the character of the U.S. Navy. But even as we pulled enemy survivors from the water, we remained vigilant for additional attacks. The Battle of Lake Gulf was far from over. Admiral Kurita's powerful central force was still approaching from the north, and Admiral Ozawa's carrier force was maneuvering somewhere to the northeast. Our victory in Surigao Strait was just one part of what would become the largest naval battle in history. As the tropical sun climbed higher over the Philippines, burning away the gun smoke and revealing the full magnitude of our triumph, I finally allowed myself to feel the satisfaction of a job well done. The Battle of Surigao Strait was over, and American naval supremacy had been decisively demonstrated in the most traditional way possible, through the thunder of heavy guns and the systematic destruction of enemy battle forces. From the bridge of West Virginia, I could see the debris field that marked the grave of the Japanese Southern Force. Oil slicks stretched for miles across the blue water, punctuated by floating wreckage and the occasional survivor being pulled aboard our rescue vessels. The old battleship Yamashiro lay somewhere beneath those peaceful-looking waves, her hull crushed by the pressure of deep water, and her magazines cold forever. The tactical implications of our victory would reverberate throughout the Pacific theater. Japan had lost 4 major warships and over 4,000 experienced naval personnel in a single night of combat, losses that could never be replaced given the industrial and manpower constraints facing the empire. More importantly, they had lost the aura of invincibility that had carried them through early years of the Pacific War. Our battle line began to secure from general quarters as the threat of additional Japanese attacks diminished. The great guns that had thundered through the night were finally silent, their barrels cooling in the tropical sun. Around me, my gun crews moved with the relaxed efficiency of professionals who had accomplished their mission with devastating effectiveness. Secure from battle stations, came the announcement over the ship's communication system, set condition of readiness 2. The tension that had gripped West Virginia for the past 12 hours began to dissipate as men realized they had survived one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. Admiral Oldendorf's tactical masterpiece would be studied in naval academies for decades to come. He had achieved the perfect execution of classical battle line tactics, using superior firepower and positioning to destroy an enemy force while suffering minimal casualties in return. The crossing of the T, that holy grail of naval tacticians since the age of sail, had been accomplished with textbook precision. But this victory belonged to every man in Task Force 77.2, from the admiral down to the lowest-ranking seaman. Our destroyer crews had shown incredible courage in their torpedo attacks, pressing home their runs despite heavy enemy fire. Our cruiser captains had maneuvered with skill and determination, adding their firepower to the bombardment while blocking enemy escape routes. Our battleship gun crews had demonstrated the professional competence that comes from months of intensive training. Most of all, this had been a victory of American industrial might and technological superiority. Our radar fire control systems had allowed us to engage enemy ships with unprecedented accuracy in conditions of limited visibility. Our armor-piercing shells had proved devastatingly effective against Japanese armor protection. Our damage control procedures had kept our own ships fighting despite enemy hits. The strategic implications were equally significant. MacArthur's amphibious forces in Leyte Gulf were safe from attack from the south, allowing the invasion to proceed according to plan. Japanese naval forces had been so badly mauled that they would be unable to mount effective resistance to future American operations in the Philippines. As I supervised the securing of our main battery, I thought about the men who hadn't lived to see this victory. The sailors who had died at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Marines who had fallen on the beaches of Guadalcanal and Tarawa, the aviators who had been shot down over the Coral Sea and Midway. This victory was their vindication, their final revenge against an enemy that had struck without warning and shown no mercy in the early days of the war. The sun was fully up now, turning the waters of Surigao Strait from black to deep blue, burning away the last wisps of gun smoke and revealing the peaceful beauty of the Philippine Islands. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, this same stretch of water had been a killing ground where the old battleship Navy had fought its last and most decisive engagement. Standing on West Virginia's bridge as we began our withdrawal from Surigao Strait, I found myself thinking about the symbolism of what we had accomplished. 5 of the 6 battleships in our battle line were Pearl Harbor survivors, ships that had been sunk or damaged in that sneak attack nearly 3 years ago. West Virginia herself had been hit by 2 torpedoes and 7 armor-piercing bombs, settling to the bottom of Pearl Harbor with 106 of her crew dead and her back broken. But American industrial might and engineering skill had raised us from the dead. West Virginia had been refloated, rebuilt, and modernized with the latest radar fire control systems and improved armor protection. We had returned to the Pacific not just repaired, but better than ever, faster, deadlier, and equipped with technology that the Japanese could only dream of matching. The same resurrection had been performed on Tennessee, California, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. Each ship bore the scars and memories of December 7th, but each had been reborn as an instrument of vengeance. Tonight, we had closed the circle that began with the Arizona's magazines exploding in Pearl Harbor's shallow water. Mr. Mitchell, Captain Benyon's voice called me to the bridge. I want you to know that the gunnery performance of this ship tonight was outstanding. Your fire control solutions were textbook perfect. The praise meant more than he could know. Professional competence was its own reward, but recognition from a commanding officer I respected made the victory even sweeter. As we steamed north toward Leyte Gulf, I could see the smoke columns of Admiral Kurita's Central Force on the horizon. The main event of the Battle of Leyte Gulf was still to come, a massive engagement off Samar that would pit Kurita's super battleships Yamato and Musashi against Admiral Sprague's escort carriers and destroyers. But that was someone else's fight. We had done our part here in the strait. The radio crackled with congratulations from Admiral Kincaid, overall commander of the 7th Fleet. CTF 77.2 from CTF 77. Well done on a magnificent victory. Your tactical execution was flawless, and your gunnery superb. The ghosts of Pearl Harbor can rest easy tonight. Indeed they could. We had answered December 7th with October 25th, sneak attack with decisive battle, treachery with professional competence. Our casualties had been remarkably light, 39 wounded across the entire task force, with no ships lost and only minor damage to a few destroyers. It was the kind of victory that naval strategists dream about: complete destruction of the enemy with minimal losses to friendly forces. Oldendorf's tactical plan had been executed with near-perfect precision. But victory in war always comes at a cost, and the cost tonight had been paid by Japanese sailors who had died doing their duty as they understood it. I felt no personal animosity toward the men we had killed. They were professional naval officers and seamen, just like us. In other circumstances, we might have served together with mutual respect. War had made us enemies, but death had made them honored adversaries. The tactical lessons of Surigao Strait would influence naval doctrine for decades to come. We had proved that radar fire control could deliver devastating accuracy even in conditions of poor visibility. We had demonstrated the continued relevance of the battle line when properly employed and supported. Most importantly, we had shown that American naval power had reached a level of technological and tactical sophistication that no enemy could match. As West Virginia settled into formation for the passage to Leyte Gulf, I took one last look at the debris-strewn waters of Surigao Strait. Somewhere beneath those waves lay the remains of Yamashiro and Fuso, proud ships that had served their country with honor before meeting their end in this narrow passage between islands. They had died fighting, as warships should, and there was honor in that. The Battle of Surigao Strait ended as the last traditional naval engagement in history, the final time that opposing battle lines would meet in the classic formation of heavy guns and armor plate that had dominated naval warfare since the age of sail. Future battles would be fought by aircraft carriers and guided missiles, by submarines and radar-guided projectiles. But never again would battleships face each other in line of battle with main batteries thundering across the dark water. In that sense, we had been privileged to participate in the end of an era. The great gunships that had ruled the seas since HMS Dreadnought revolutionized naval architecture in 1906 were passing into history, replaced by the aircraft carrier and the fast cruiser as the primary instruments of naval power projection. The age of the battleship was ending, and we had written its final chapter in fire and steel. But what a chapter it had been! Admiral Oldendorf's battle line had achieved tactical perfection, destroying an entire enemy force while suffering negligible casualties in return. We had crossed the T with textbook precision, concentrated superior firepower on inferior numbers, and maintained perfect fire discipline throughout the engagement. It was everything that naval tacticians from Nelson to Maine had envisioned as the ideal sea battle. The strategic implications would resonate throughout the remainder of the Pacific War. Japan's combined fleet had suffered losses that could never be replaced, not just in ships and equipment, but in trained personnel and operational experience. The cream of their naval officer corps was scattered across the bottom of Philippine waters, taking with them decades of professional knowledge and tactical expertise. More importantly, the psychological impact of such a decisive defeat would demoralize Japanese naval forces and encourage American commanders to take greater risks in future operations. When word of Surigao Strait reached Tokyo, it would confirm what many Japanese leaders already suspected, that the war was lost and further resistance would only increase the scale of their eventual defeat. As we formed up for the passage to Leyte Gulf, I reflected on the chain of events that had brought us to this moment. From the shock and humiliation off Pearl Harbor to the methodical island-hopping campaign that had brought American forces to the Philippines, every battle had been a step toward this ultimate vindication. Coral Sea, Midway, Guadalcanal, the Gilbert Islands, the Marshalls, the Marianas. Each victory had brought us closer to the moment when we could meet the Japanese Navy on equal terms and destroy it completely. The men around me, sailors, gunners, officers, chiefs, represented the finest traditions of the United States Navy. They had trained relentlessly, fought courageously, and performed their duties with the kind of professional competence that makes victory inevitable. Tonight, they had proven themselves worthy heirs to John Paul Jones, David Farragut, and George Dewey. Admiral Oldendorf's voice crackled over the radio one final time. All ships, CTF 77.2. We have achieved a complete and decisive victory over enemy naval forces in Surigao Strait. 2 enemy battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, 1 light cruiser, and 4 destroyers have been sunk or destroyed. Enemy casualties are estimated at over 4,000 killed. Our own casualties are 39 wounded, with no ships lost. This engagement will go down in naval history as one of the most perfectly executed battle line actions ever fought. He was right. Military historians would study the Battle of Surigao Strait for generations, analyzing Oldendorf's tactical masterpiece and marveling at the precision with which it was executed. Naval cadets would learn about radar fire control, crossing the T, and the systematic destruction of enemy combat power. But they would be studying ancient history, the last chapter of the battleship era. As West Virginia steamed north toward her next assignment, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a professional warrior who had accomplished his mission with devastating effectiveness. We had avenged Pearl Harbor in the most direct and decisive way possible. We had proved American naval supremacy beyond any shadow of doubt. We had written the final page in the book of battleship warfare. The last battleship duel in history had ended with Japan's fleet burning on the bottom of Surigao Strait, and we had been there to see it done. It was enough for any sailor's lifetime. The Battle of Surigao Strait, fought on October 25, 1944, marked the decisive end of Japanese battleship power in the Pacific War. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's perfectly executed battle line engagement destroyed Admiral Nishimura's southern force completely, sinking battleships Yamashiro and Fuso along with heavy cruiser Mogami and 4 destroyers. American casualties were minimal, 39 wounded with no ships lost. It was the last time in naval history that opposing battle lines engaged each other with heavy guns, marking the end of an era that had begun with HMS Dreadnought nearly 4 decades earlier.